when we think of the context of a brother or sister's death, that's a really important aspect of the grief and an important predictor of how we will experience the grief and the loss and the death. So, as I was saying, it's such an important relationship, and for everyone, for almost everyone, it's a massive experience. Now, the context isn't tragic if maybe you're 85 years of age and your 90-year-old sibling has died peacefully in their sleep, and it kind of removes the tragedy of it. Actually, even then there will be a loss. There may be an isolation, a loneliness. You may become in touch with your own mortality. Oh my goodness, this 90-year-old sister or brother died, maybe I'm next. But I imagine that a lot of the people that are listening and tuning into this, unfortunately, have an element of tragedy and deep, profound loss when it comes to the context of sibling loss. A lot of the time, maybe the sibling died during their childhood and your childhood, or when they were young, and a very premature death. So, they were in their 20s, their 30s, their 50s, and there's a lot of sadness around that this person didn't get to survive. So there are many factors that influence a parent's response or a person's response to a loss of a sibling. One of them is the depth of the bond between you both. So you may have been more like best friends than siblings, and you may be extremely close with each other and talk to each other every single day. You live very intimately in each other's lives, even though you're now young adults or middle-aged or much older than that. But the lifelong connection has been strong, and this has been a sister or a brother and a friend, maybe a best friend, and that can be very, very difficult and heartbreaking. Although, in a way, that's almost the easiest, that's a strange word to use, I know, but the easiest and less complicated grief, because what's remaining in your heart are cherished memories and sadness that the person is no longer with you. But your heart isn't darkened with lots of regret and pain around the way the relationship was with you guys. The depth of the emotional bond is critical in predicting the emotional fallout. So if you had a relationship that wasn't so close with your sibling, maybe you live miles apart or countries apart, and you grow up and you get busy with your jobs, and then children maybe come, and there's just life happens, and that close connection maybe that you had in younger years has been lost, and you actually became quite remote. There can be a real sadness and a regret that I wish we'd had a closer bond. If I could go back now, there is so much that I would like to say. But either way, whether this was your best friend in the world or a sibling that really the connection had kind of become quite remote and faded with, either way, there's a sentimentality that will often regularly emerge. And when the sibling is dying or has passed away, it really can bring you back to your child. It can open up a bank of memories. The bereaved person and you're not just thinking about let's say this was an illness for a few months, and you're not just thinking about their illness and their death and the wake and the funeral. You're going right back to your earliest memories and the holidays in Bundoran, and the crack that you had as kids, and the times you got into trouble with your parents, and the secrets that you had, and the times that you half killed each other. And as I said, it opens up this really big bank of memories. So you're not just grieving this sibling, you're grieving the life that you had together, you're grieving the connection that you had together. And one of the hallmarks of a profound death is that nothing will ever be quite the same again. That's a really big statement for a person's life. And in terms of the context, it's also important to, I suppose, take note of and hold in regard the nature of the death. Was it a very peaceful death, that this person had suffered a long time, and actually, you know, there is a relief at the end of that, which doesn't mean that you're okay with the death, but a relief that he or she's not suffering anymore, and that they're maybe at peace now. And the actual experience of death was very beautiful and graceful and very prayerful, and the letting go was actually very healing. Or was it a sudden, unanticipated death, especially if it was traumatic or violent, or you know, there was any kind of element of trauma at all in it, that can be very distressing for people, that you weren't there when it happened. You imagine what it must have been like for your sibling. Maybe it could have been a medical death, and one of the big things that really snags people up is the preventability of the death. You know, some sibling deaths are unavoidable, and it's very common to think, what if, and if only I had phoned her, if only I hadn't gone to the shop, if only I hadn't asked her to do this, if only she hadn't, and you're plagued by the rewinding the tape and playing the other scenarios, or you're kind of in this horror movie, imagining the awfulness of the death and what your sibling may have experienced, and that is torturing yourself. You create a lot of torment, and often there's, as well as the wishful thinking and the going back and the if onlys and the what ifs, there can be a lot of anger that will churn up there as well. Anger at the situation around the death, that it shouldn't have happened, and maybe rightly so. Maybe, you know, your anger is very justified. But when you have your grief and your heartbreak, and then you add anger into the mix, we can see now that already the grief is complicated, and add into that actually this death has been through a trauma, or it's very sudden. You know, your brother went to work and he didn't come home, and there was absolutely no warning in any way. So how do you adjust to this massive change in your life? And also, whatever the context of your sibling's death, the last 24 hours of their life will replay in your mind, and the last time that you saw them. And beginning of grief, that can take up a lot of your time. You're thinking about what their last moments and thoughts were and day was, and the last time you saw them. And often there's a lot of yearning comes up. You know, if only I had told him that I loved him. I should have phoned him much sooner. Why did I not call and see him more clearly? You know, I should have got to know him far more. So there can be a lot of regret, and really that is about not neglect in the relationship, but yearning to be closer to the person. So around the context of the grief, there are a lot of factors there to take into consideration, and next we will look a little more deeply into the dynamics of grief.